Welcome to the Plant Lovers Tour at the J.C. Ralston Arboretum for March 2021. I'm Douglas Ruhren. I am the Gardens Manager here at the Ralston Arboretum. And I want to just say, if you're wondering why Tim Alderton is not the camera person this afternoon, he went home with a really bad headache. So Tim, if you're listening, we hope your headache's getting better, or that you're getting better and the headache's going away. Asian Valley is a significant part of the Ralston Arboretum. It might beg the question of why have an area dedicated to the plants from Asia? Well, some have said that Asia is the mother of gardens. The flora of Asia is very, very diverse and much more diverse than North America. And there's one big reason for that. The last ice age, I barely remembered it was ended almost 12,000 years ago. And most of North America and Europe were totally glaciated at that time. And you can imagine, miles of ice scraping across your arboretum or your backyard garden, it's going to pretty much wipe out everything. So there are many instances where, I'm standing here with the stem of Calocarpa, beautyberry, and the scientific name Calocarpa means beautyberry. Callus is beauty and carpa is fruit. In North America, we have Calocarpa americana, and when you get into Mexico and probably Central America, you have Calocarpa acuminata. But in China alone, there's about 70 species of Calocarpa. So that's an example where the same genus is represented on both continents, but there's a very limited number of species in that genus in North America, but many species in Asia. Take a few steps up here. One genus that occurs on both continents, and I'll step back a second and say, it's thought that when you have the same genus on multiple continents, it's because they evolved long enough ago when the continents were all one, Pangea. But as continental drift occurred and the Pangea separated into the continents as we now know them, the species were isolated from each other, and evolution is sort of an ongoing process. So what might have started off as one species in that genus are now multiple species. And this is our very common North American native, Fagus grandifolia, meaning big leaves. And across the way, we have one of the Asian species. Fagus lucida, and it has the same habit. Get a little bit closer to some buds so you can see them on camera. But you see the buds are very elongated and the many scales. When they start to leaf out, you'll see all the separate bud scales. But these different species that occur on the same continent, I need to go up and read the sign, get all the terms.
What plant is that where you were just showing us?
Yeah, when these species get separated by continental drift or other geological factors, it's called disjunction. And other plants we see that in are the genus Cornus, which is dogwood, and sassafras, and Campsis, the trumpet vine. Now, Dennis I'm going to make Dennis grumpy, and he's our cameraman today, and I'll jump all over the place. But I just mention this plant right here.
Doug, before you move on to the new one, can you mention what the name of the last one you just showed was?
The beech?
The Fagus, yep.
Yeah, that was Fagus lucida. You think of the English word lucid, bright or shining. Last month when we met a lot of boxwoods and boxwood relatives, we met the genus Sarcacoka, and most of them are 3 to 4 to 5 foot tall shrubs. But this is Sarcacoka Hookariana, the variety Dignia, which is it only gets, that's probably not even a foot tall, or maybe almost a foot tall, and it spreads underground slowly. And I think it's just one of the nicest smaller scale ground covers. If you had an acre to cover, you'd need to be very wealthy to afford to cover that amount of ground. But if you need a small scale ground cover to, cover 100 square feet or something like that, it's a really beautiful little evergreen. It's not quite as in full bloom as some of its bigger cousins, which are in full bloom at this time of year, but it'll soon be in full bloom. Do you want me to hold that sign up to the camera?
You could.
Yeah.
Or Dennis can focus in on it. It's was beyond my focus.
You know how to spell Sarcacoka. It's a little bit like Mississippi.
Put your hand behind it, Doug. There you go.
Put my hand behind it. Do you want me to put my shirt behind it?
There you go. Yep.
Yeah. No, if you don't like orange, we can also do bright blue. I'm standing next to our original plant of Cornus Wilsoniana that we named, the Arboretum gave a cultivar name to last year, white jade. You see how the bark is quite white when it's freshly peeled. There are quite a few species of Cornus native to North America, both East Coast and West Coast, but there's many more species in Asia. And this is Cornus Wilsoniana, Wilsoniana. Ernest, he went by Ernest China Wilson, was one of the most famous European and of the European and American plant collectors that went to China. And so you see Wilson on a huge number of plants that were collected in China. Our native flowering dogwood, Cornus florida, I guess gets its common name flowering because it has those four big showy bracts that look like petals. And if you think of the flower of the inflorescence of Cornus florida, it's just those little yellow ones in the center that are true flowers. And most Cornus species don't have big showy bracts, and that is certainly the case with Cornus Wilsoniana. They're 2-3 inch wide inflorescence of small yellowish flowers, and they're followed by blue-black fruit.
We've had a question, Dennis.
Yes.
It's going to be in the trade now.
Yes. The Arboretum has distributed some plants of the cultivar that now has the name white jade. And a wholesale tree nursery is starting to put it into production. So you should be able to obtain this in the not too distant future. We're going to turn around and Cornus canadensis, the eastern redbud, is you also have did I say Cornus? Cercis. Cercis canadensis is oh dear. Cercis canadensis is the eastern redbud, the North American native, and it's one of those names that are a little bit, a little bit odd because I don't know that it occurs all the way up in Canada, but it's certainly common east of the Mississippi. And when you get into Texas, you have Cercis mexicana, but there are, I think, about 6 species of redbud in China, and this is one of them, Cercis glabra. It has more of a shrubby habit with multiple stems and much shorter internodes. Underneath it is Iris japonica, and you might think that Iris japonica would be called the Japanese iris, but that common name is used for Iris insata, which is the iris that's grown for its in the cultivated forms, the very large flowers. But Iris japonica can be used as a ground cover. It's rather rapid spreading and definitely wants a shady spot. It's not happy in full sun.
The common name?
Iris japonica?
Yeah.
What is its common name? I don't know a common name for it. Does anyone in the audience know a common name for Iris japonica? Well, you know, the fact that we didn't put a common name on the label for Iris japonica makes me think that there's not a common name. These are bananas. The banana family has a very small number of genera in it. The biggest one is the genus Musa, M-U-S-A. And most species in the banana family are native to Asia, mostly the warmer parts of Asia. There are about 10 species that are native to native to China, but there are a number of other species that are cultivated in China. Who is this one? Well, we'll just go on to the other one. Oh, yeah. This is Musa sycamensis. And again, you know, probably every tour I make the point that whenever you see that ENSIS ending to a specific epithet, that indicates that it's from, and in this case, it's from Sikkim. It's a Sikkim banana, native to India and Sikkim Himalayan region. But the bananas we're looking at today are ones that are winter hardy, even through the cold winter we had a number of years ago. But so many important edible plants are native to Asia, the bananas, and we'll see others later on. This is one of the most cold hardy of the bananas. This is Musa baju. It's native to Japan and, I think Taiwan. It's not native to China, though it's widely cultivated in China, where it's used both as an ornamental plant, but also medicinally. But its common name, Japanese fiber banana, is not referring to dietary fiber, but it's a textile fiber. And on a banana is just a very large herbaceous perennial. The true stem is largely underground. It's like a big elephant ear tuber. It's a very compressed stem. And the pseudostems above the ground are just the leaf petioles, the leaf stalks. But if you think of, you have these fibers that run the whole length of the leaf stalk, and they're fairly strong fibers. They were used, from what I've read, they were used to make summer weight kimonos in Japan. So we just grow it as an ornamental. We don't spend too much time weaving fabric for kimonos here, but you can see this stem is still green. If we had an exceptionally cold winter, they can die to the ground, but they'll quickly regrow. But here, just a few more days of warm weather and they'll start pushing up new foliage out of the top of the stem. You can see a spent flower inflorescence here from last year. There's another one. You can see little bananas up top that didn't ever quite form. I don't know whether the growing season's not long enough for the fruit to fully develop, or whether there's not adequate pollination for the fruit to develop. But it's a long inflorescence. The little flowers are underneath these bracts, and then fruit is up above.
Before you move on, Doug,
yes, sir.
Question for the people that hear you: when to cut them back?
when do we cut them back? Tim's preference is to just cut the stalks back, up high. My preference is to cut them to the ground. If you're going to cut them to the ground, you can cut them to the ground anytime. If you're going to try to preserve the stem, then you would do that late winter, so about now. The reason why my preference is to cut them to the ground, all these dead leaf stalks are going to shed over a bunch of months. And so if you cut it to the ground, you get rid of all the old stuff, and then the new stem is all brand new, and so it's much tidier. But and if you cut them to the ground, they very quickly get just as tall as if you left the stalks. But they can be handled either way. What's that?
Benefit of Tim's method.
What?
What's the benefit of Tim's method?
I don't know. Maybe,
Taller, quicker.
they're taller right away because I need a stick here. Bill did too good a job of cleaning up this morning. If you cut the stem back to about like here, the new leaves are going to be produced up there rather than from ground level. So, but in about a month's time, they're all going to be the same height. So I don't think there's much advantage to leaving them up high. But Musa baju also spreads underground, and it's really hard work to dig out the excess stems, but we really need to dig out probably 2/3 of this year. The question was, does the Arboretum still have the plant of Ruba bracteata? We sent it to a nursery for them to increase it, but we hope to get plants back of it. Musella is a genus very closely related to Musa. I suspect that Musella probably means little Musa, little banana. And it's a very cold hardy one. The stems only get about 3 feet tall. And the typical form has a yellow bract, so it looks like a big yellow artichoke. And there's a cultivated form that's given the name Ruba bracteata, which merely means red bracted. And Mark brought back a plant from China, I think in 2019, and we had it all summer of last year. But then the thought was to send it to a nursery that would concentrate on producing it. So we've not seen it bloom yet, but look forward to seeing it bloom.
And one more.
What pests? The question was, what pests are active on banana plants? I've never noticed any on banana plants. Is this person with the question dealing with pests on banana plants?
Didn't say, they were just wondering what would be on them, if anything.
Most plants don't have serious pests. And I don't, bananas are in that same group of families with ginger lilies and the canna family. And most of those families are not bothered by deer. Of course, having said that, the deer have now decided to go out and eat them.
Well, canna certainly are eaten, Doug.
Can deer eat cannas?
Not deer, but those horrible, nasty ones.
Oh, well, no, I was talking about deer. Deer. Okay. We have I don't know, Dennis, when you're standing there setting up the camera, do I need to be quiet or just continue? Okay. I'm here at another species of Cornus, another dogwood. This is Cornus Wilsonii. No, I'm sorry, Cornus officinalis. When you see that specific epithet, officinalis, it's referring to apothecary shop. So it's a plant that's used medicinally, though it seems like pretty much everything gets used medicinally in Asian medicine. And it's typical of most dogwoods in that it doesn't have big showy bracts. I'll grab a spray of flowers. Yeah, I need the blue background for this one. You know, each of these little heads is a cluster of small, I think 5-petaled flowers. I'm far too clumsy to pull one of them apart. Also need my glasses. But if you think of Cornus florida or native flowering dogwood, the little flowers in the center are much like these.
That's beautiful.
So there aren't the big showy bracts, but it produces enough of these small flowers, and at this time of year when there's not an overabundance of things to grow. Now, Cornus officinalis is extremely similar to the European Cornus mas, M-A-S. And in Europe, and especially cold parts of Europe, where you start to get limited as to what things survive the winter, Cornus mas is also grown for its edible fruit. And Cornus mas' common name is Cornelian cherry dogwood. I suspect that Cornus officinalis has its own common names wherever it's native, but this is the Asian counterpart to Cornus mas. The two species can be distinguished by their bark. Cornus officinalis has this bark, you can readily see that, this peely bark, smooth underneath, but all this flaky bark, whereas Cornus mas has a smooth bark. Of course, Acer palmatum, the Japanese dogwood, Lordy. Japanese maple is probably more common in gardens than in the wild, and this is one of the cutleaf forms, the dissectum group. But Acer palmatum is just one species native to Japan, and I hope that people will start to pay attention to other species of maple because it's a huge genus and there's many that are very beautiful. Yeah, last year, largely with the help of the gentlemen that work in the horticultural field laboratory, of which the Arboretum is part, helped us build, how many now? 1, 2, 3, 4 rain gardens. Most of the Arboretum is sloping downhill to a large stormwater management area. And the thought was to keep most of the runoff from the Arboretum in the Arboretum rather than overtaxing that area down here. So this is one of the rain garden areas that we built last year, and this one is in Asian Valley. I think Mark very, very accurately described a rain garden as an area that's very dry unless you have a big rain, or he described it much better than I just did. It's like a badly retold joke. But a rain garden is not an area that necessarily stays wet, but it's an area that captures water. And because the water is not running off the site, it has a chance to soak in the ground. So the plants that tolerate a rain garden have to be ones that tolerate intermittent flooding and then periods of severe drought. And so finding plants for a rain garden can be a little bit challenging, but we're getting there. The Ralston Arboretum and the Johnston County Nursery Association, which is a county just east of Raleigh, have a joint effort called the Choice Plants Program. And I'm standing here stroking this little holly-leafed tea olive, Osmanthus heterophilus. And it's the cultivar Kaori Hime. And, it's a Japanese cultivar name, so I probably butchered it. But Hime means princess and is generally applied to plants that are dwarves. And Kaori is fragrant. So in this case, the Japanese cultivar transplants to fragrant princess. You can see it's not a tiny dwarf plant, but it does have these it has these very tiny leaves. These aren't even an inch long on this stem. Some of the more vigorous stems will have leaves that maybe are slightly more than an inch, but generally the leaves are tiny. And as you would imagine for a tea olive, it has very fragrant flowers in the fall. Osmanthus heterophyllus is much more cold hardy than Osmanthus fragrans. It's hardy into zone 6. It's a plant I learned back during the Ice Age when I was in college. It certainly is a fairly common landscape plant in the New York City area.
I thought you were alive before the Ice Age.
Well, I was, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
You're just long-lived.
Yeah. So, beautiful little leaf on a nice little shrub. The bamboos are also native to Asia. They can comprise several genera. The Phyllostachys are the ones that you frequently see here that run so quickly underground, but this is a clump-forming one. So after a while, even a clump-forming one gets pretty big, but you can see how the culms, the pseudostems of the bamboo are real close to each other. It's not popping up many feet from the previous stems. And this is the genus Bambusa. That's right. You need a background, don't you?
No, I got it.
And Bambusa multiplex, and it's the cultivar fern leaf. The leaflets are much smaller than on the typical Bambusa multiplex. And if we have a really cold winter, it can die to the ground, but the winters we've been having lately, it comes through just fine. Watch Doug wander around the garden. We were talking about bananas a few minutes ago, and I mentioned Musella lasiocarpa, the Chinese yellow bamboo. I shouldn't go from bamboo to banana. But these are the approximately 3-foot tall stems that I promised. You can see last year's leaves would make it almost 6 feet tall. And this clump didn't bloom last year, so I can't show you the spent inflorescence, but the one in the perennial border bloomed all summer. But the citrus is another genus that is Asian, and these are hybrids between various cultivated forms of citrus and the trifoliate orange. Prunus, this is Prunus jacquemontii. Do you want me to?
I got it.
You got it? Okay. Prunus is a big genus, includes many important fruit plants such as cherries, plums, peaches, no, not apples, but also many ornamentals. Prunus jacquemontii, the Afghan bush cherry, you can see this stem up here is, slightly more than 6 feet tall, but that's as tall as you'd expect it to get. It'll be in full bloom in probably about a week's time unless we turn cold. But Prunus persica, the edible peach, is a case where it's misnamed because it's originated in northwest China, but the specific epithet persica is referring to Persia, but it was introduced into the Middle East and Europe many, many centuries ago, and whoever named it Prunus persica must have not been aware that it originally came from northwest China. The genus Magnolia is a very old group. It's one of the oldest of the flowering plants. And not too many years ago, a number of different genera were collapsed into the genus Magnolia. And this represents one of the magnolias that used to be in the genus Camellia. Well, this is essentially banana shrub, has absolutely no relationship to the edible bananas, but the old-fashioned banana shrub, when it blooms, it smelled like banana candy throughout the whole garden. They're loaded with flower buds. We might get a chance to see some others, but little fuzzy buds, but evergreen shrubs. And right here we have a tree peony that's broken bud. You can see the young leaves. They look like fingers at this point, and the great big flower bud. They're native to the drier parts of northern China, and they don't usually get hurt by a late frost. They're used to starting into bloom in late winter, but they are a true woody shrub, whereas the old-fashioned peony of gardens is a herbaceous perennial. Chris mentioned the deciduous conifer grafting workshop this Saturday. Well, this is one of the deciduous conifers, ginkgo, and I failed to point out the dawn redwood down below, the Metasequoia, but it's another deciduous conifer. Probably most of us, when we were less experienced gardeners, thought conifers, the terms conifer and evergreen were interchangeable, but they're not, because not most conifers are evergreen, but not all conifers are evergreen. And evergreen is merely a descriptive term. It's not a group of plants. We just saw the Evergreen Magnolia there. And a few steps away, I can show you an evergreen maple, and there are evergreen dogwoods. So it's not a group of plants. It's just the characteristic of a plant that holds its foliage. An interesting thing about ginkgo and the dawn redwood, the Metasequoia, is that though they are not any longer considered native to North America, they can be found in the fossil record of North America. So the question of just what is a native is a fairly complicated one, because at one time, both of them occurred in what is now North America, as were horses. Horses were not native to North America. When Europeans arrived, they had long ago gone extinct, maybe also due to the Ice Age, I don't know. But this is a really curious selection of ginkgo. It's one called Chi-Chi, and it has these odd growths on the trunk, a little bit like the udders of a cow. And I'm standing next to an Akuba. If the Ralston Arboretum doesn't already have the largest collection of Akuba cultivars, it's well on its way, because we've recently gotten several collections of cuttings of additional cultivars. So I'm guessing we now have several different cultivars, several hundred cultivars of Akuba Japonica. Now, Akuba Japonica is not the only species in that genus. There's a number of others, like Akuba omiensis from Mount Omi, Akuba obcordata, which has a big, very hard leaf. But all the Akubas are dioecious. The plants are either male or female. And if they do females manage to set fruit, the fruit is fairly showy. I see one on a dwarf one over there. If yellow dots on a plant make you nervous, well, there's lots of lovely cultivars of Akuba Japonica with solid green leaves. And this is a compact one. It's only about 2 feet tall, and they're many years old. It's one called Petite Jade, but just a beautiful compact plant. I remember a time when this wasn't part of the Arboretum. The Arboretum grew in a number of stages. And originally this part was not part of the Arboretum, and then it was added. And, some of the there are a number of plants in Asian Valley that are not of Asian origin that predate the time it was became Asian Valley. But I don't, it might have been the decade that I wasn't in this area that this became Asian Valley. Oh, and I see right here, I mentioned that a moment ago I was talking about evergreen not being a group of plants, but a characteristic. I'm standing almost under this evergreen dogwood. This is Cornus elliptica, first choice. And the Cornus elliptica and a number of other closely related species like Cornus hongkongensis, they do have showy bracts, and you can see this good-sized flower bud here. These Asian evergreen dogwoods remind me very much of Cornus kusa, differing largely only in that these are evergreen and kusa is deciduous, but they'll have the big pointed bracts like kusa does. And you can't see the veining very readily on this in shade here, but it has the typical what's referred to as arcuate veins. Instead of, being straight out from the central vein, they arch out. I don't think that shows up at all. Does the underside show up anymore?
No.
No?
No better.
Yeah, but that's so typical of leaves in the genus Cornus. Well, the genus Begonia is a huge genus, and probably the vast majority are truly tropical plants. And for the longest time, the only begonia that us North American gardeners were aware of that was winter hardy was Begonia grandis, which is a very useful shade plant. But these red leaves are the new growth on Begonia pedatophyta. You see that?
Can't see.
Yeah. And it always comes up super early. And if it gets really cold, it can get cut back to the ground. But then the next time we have a mild spell, it'll start back into growth. And you can see these big rhizomes at the surface of the soil. It's a real vigorous plant. But there are more and more winter hardy begonias and ones that we're testing for winter hardy that will be great additions to the shade garden. Now's not really the time to be showing off hardy begonias because most of them are completely dormant, but this one is interesting because it's already starting into growth. It's a big, handsome, pedate leaf, like a hand-shaped leaf, and pinkish flowers in the summer. I don't remember the flowers too well. It's I think, more valuable as a foliage plant. And the gingers, the genus Asarum, again, North America has a few species, but in Asia there are huge numbers. And this is quite a robust one. Asarum hypogynum, I think hypo is below, so and I think gynum is referring to the ovaries. So the ovaries, lower part of the flower are underground, but big, beautiful leaves here. And the Solomon seal, the genus Polygonatum, occurs in both North America and in Asia, but the related Disporopsis, which are usually referred to as evergreen Solomon seals, I think are strictly Asian. And this is a nice, robust one. We're a little bit behind on labeling because we didn't have our volunteers working on labels most of 2020. And they've returned, which is a wonderful thing. The question was, what is the term that I use to describe the veination on a Cornus leaf. It's arcuate, ARCUATE. Yeah, the question was, how resilient are the Akubas? Are there any significant disease or pest problems? They are of extremely easy culture. There's just two things you want to avoid. And one is poor drainage. And they don't need sharp drainage. They just don't want a soggy spot. So in most yards, that's possible. They also don't want hot sun. They will take part sun, but mostly they don't want to be out in the hot sun of midday in the summer. And the other thing you have to avoid are deer. Deer do like Akubas. So beyond that, they're really easy. They're super easy to root. They're beautiful for cut flower arrangements. And often if you cut them for an arrangement and months later, when you get tired of them, they still look flawless. But when you throw them out, you realize they've rooted in the vase of water. So Akubas are easy. Just avoid soggy soil and deer. I mentioned that Akubas are either male or female. And this little female, again, you see, this is a really dwarf thing. It's just above knee level on me. And it hasn't set much fruit, but just to give you an idea of what the fruit looks like, it's a good size, sort of maraschino cherry size fruit. And there isn't another Akuba very close to this one. So as we add more Akubas to the plantings at the Ralston Arboretum, we'll put some effort into making sure that there are pairs of males and females, so we get a really good fruit display. And the typical color on a Akuba fruit is red, but we have a selection called pink champagne, so I think you can figure out what color its fruit might be. And there are white and yellow fruited ones as well. And the fruit does tend to persist all winter. Akuba used to be in the same family as dogwoods, but now I think it might be in its own family, the Akubiaceae, but those changes happen every few days or so. In the background here, it's one of the evergreen Asian magnolias. That's Magnoliamaurier, named for somebody named Maud. And the flowers are sort of a little bit floppy. Many of them are wonderfully fragrant. And like a lot of winter blooming things, they can get clobbered by a hard frost, but then the buds that haven't yet opened will open back up in the next mild spell. We have a few minutes to spare at the end. We might walk a little bit further down. There's a magnolia similar to this that's just covered in flowers. I mentioned dawn redwood, Metasequoia, several times. This is a really beautiful, hardly can call it a dwarf, but certainly somewhat compact selection. It's Metasequoia glyptostroboides, and the cultivar is Sherman's Nordlicht. Okay. And I'm sure Sherman's somebody's family name, and Nordlicht is just German for northern light. And you'll sometimes see it in the trade translated into English, which you're not actually supposed to do with a cultivar name. But it's a really lovely thing. The new growth is sort of silvery to sort of a pale iceberg lettuce green. And it is quite a bit more compact than a seedling Metasequoia, but certainly not a little thing. But this is one of the Metasequoias you could graft this weekend if you were participating in that workshop. But I wanted to mention Camellias. Camellias are a genus that is entirely Asian. We were so used to seeing them in gardens that we sometimes lose side of the fact that they are not a native plant. And there's several hundred species of camellias in Asia. Camellia japonica is the most widely spread species. It's native not only to Japan, but also Korea and China. And they're widespread in Asia. Some of them come from colder parts of Asia and are good plants for our Zone 7 gardens. But then there are other species that, there are even some subtropical species, such as the yellow-flowered ones from Yunnan, China, and tropical parts of Vietnam. But we have several man-made hybrids here. This one, this great big tall plant, is Camellia. It's a hybrid. It's Camellia cinnamon sensation. No, this is cinnamon Cindy. I get the two confused because one is a sport of the other. Cinnamon sensation is a single form of this. This is cinnamon Cindy, which is this double form. And it's very fragrant. When I went over to the plant, I could smell the fragrance on the air. We often don't think of camellias as being fragrant, but some of the wild species are. And the fragrance in this hybrid comes from a Japanese parent, Camellia luchuensis, which is Lutch, and then the ensis ending. Luchu is a variation on the spelling for Ryukyu, the Ryukyu Islands in southern Japan. And it has a tiny white flower, but it's very, very fragrant. And this was bred by Dr. William Ackerman, who was a plant breeder at the National Arboretum, who was breeding for fragrance in camellias until that big freeze in the 1980s, at which point he was told by his boss to breed for cold hardiness. And then just beyond it is another hybrid camellia, Marie Christensen. It's there's a group of hybrids that are referred to as Camellia williamsii. They're hybrids between japonica and another species, Camellia saluenensis from Salween, China. So a big group of ornamental large shrubs to small trees. People often ask, well, when do I prune camellias? Basically, they don't need regular pruning because they're trees with permanent stems and not shrubs like a forsythia that benefit from renewal pruning. The genus Mahonia in North America is represented by a couple species native to the Pacific Northwest and a number of species native to Mexico and Central America, but a large number of species in Asia. This is I think a very handsome species. You want me to lift up the label? You can get it. Mahonia oiwakensis, helpfully labeled Chinese Mahonia. There's so many Chinese Mahonias, but these leaves are very stiff. They're a little bit pokey, not vicious, but a really beautiful architectural plant. Wonder what we'll get if we raise some from seed. And I'm standing right next to one of the most beautiful, well, that's a silly thing to say, but a very beautiful species of maple. This is the paperbark maple, Acer gricium. And you see how it gets its name of paperbark. It's interesting for a maple because instead of the leaf being simple, it's divided into 3 leaflets. It's one of the few trifoliate maples, but grown primarily for its beautiful bark. It's 4 o'clock. We're happy to answer questions now if there are questions. Oh, yeah, Chris is telling me to ask those questions in the chat, so you'll have to type them in, but simple enough to do. I managed to do it. We were in the vicinity of a number of Stachyurst. The question was, are the Stachyurst blooming yet? We were in the vicinity of several Stachyurst, a number of selections of Stachyurst praecox, and maybe another species or two. They were still tight, not close to blooming. Now, way off in the winter garden, there's Stachyurst Himalaya, and that might be blooming because it's always many weeks ahead of the other species.
A couple more questions, Doug.
Yeah.
How tall will the Acer gricium grow?
The question is, how tall does Acer gricium grow? Certainly 20 feet tall. It's not a full-size tree, but a good mid-sized tree. I suspect with a great amount of time, they might get taller than that, but they're fairly slow. Oh, the question was, is there such a thing as a white redbud? Yeah, absolutely. There are multiple cultivars of white-flowered forms of the eastern redbud, Cercis canadensis. There's certainly white forms of some of the Asian species. And I think in all of those, it's just a matter of time before somebody finds a white-flowered seedling of one of these other species. If you are able to collect fruit, the seed, off a white-flowered redbud, there's a pretty good chance that seedlings will also be white-flowered. As soon as they germinate, you'll know whether or not they're going to be white-flowered because the foliage would be a paler green and there won't be any red at all in the stem or in the leaf stalks. And Denny Werner has also introduced weeping forms of white-flowered redbuds. There's one in the White Garden here. The question was if it is only the female Akuba japonicas that produce fruit. Yes, it's just like it's just like as in animals. Only the female bear the young, and the males do not bear young. In flowering plants, the young is the fruit, which contains the seed, which is the result of pollination, which is sexual reproduction. Yeah, the paperbark maple is Acer gricium. Not sure what gricium is referring to. Gris is gray, but I'm not sure. And this is actually a cultivar. I'm sure it's grafted red. The paperbark maple is very hard to root, and it's also has a propensity to produce lots of seeds, but there's no embryo at home. So they can't grow it from seed a lot of time either. The question was, can you remove the lower limbs on a dawn redwood so it has more of a tree-like growth habit? Yes, absolutely. It'd be better to do it when it's younger so the cuts are smaller, but it would tolerate that at any time now. Oh, yeah, Akuba japonica, it doesn't, well, any one cultivar is either going to be a male cultivar or a female cultivar, so you will not have a female Akuba japonica crotonifolia and a female crotonifolia, so they're going to have to be pollinated by another Akuba japonica, but it would always be a different cultivar. I don't know if the different species of Akuba will cross. That'd be an interesting thing to determine, but I just don't have any experience with that. Do you want to go see the magnolia that's covered in flowers or not?
Yes.
We could do that.
Yes, please.
Asked if we talked about Stewartia pseudocamellia.
No, we did not. The question was, did we talk about Stewartia pseudocamellia? No, we did not.
And you want to go do the camellia? I don't know where you're
Magnolia, it's right behind the perennial border. In the background is another Asian evergreen magnolia. That's Magnolia cavallerii, subspecies platypetala, I think. And this is the best I've ever seen it bloom. It is the kind of thing that blooms at this precarious
the
time
tree
of
again?
year where if it turns cold, below 28, all those open flowers will be lost. But you have some really perfect moments. And I'd cut this one flower off another evergreen magnolia we walked past. I'm hard pressed to tell one from the other, but foliage is real similar, and probably comes down to how many hairs is on the bud scale or something. But this is a hybrid one bred by Dr. Clifford Parks, the late Dr. Clifford Parks in Chapel Hill, called Eternal Spring, and it does have flowers for an extended part of the year, and a pretty nice fragrance too. But the flower is very similar to most other magnolias, one of the earliest evolved of the flowering plants. And there was a question as to whether or not Stachyurst were blooming. This will need a blue background and not an orange background. I came prepared with multiple backgrounds today. This is Stachyurst Himalaya. You can see the buds at the base of the flower stalk are just starting to break, but it's far from being in bloom. Most of the flower stalks flower spikes were not yet showing any color, so it's early for the Stachyurst. Of course, everything seems to be about two weeks or more, maybe even 3 weeks late this year. Wasn't an exceptionally cold winter, but maybe the effect was that it never was a particularly warm winter. And the Stachyurst all have these pendant flower spikes.
We're getting direction from our director.
Yeah, all the Stachyurst have these pendant. Well, see, I'm trying to get it so the sun shines on it.
You mark, Doug.
What? All the Stachyurst have these pendant flower spikes, and the curious thing is they're really rather stiff. You sort of expect they would just flop down again, but they're not. They're pretty stiff. And last week we did a little program on pruning hydrangeas, and whenever one is talking about pruning, you have to know whether things are bloom on old wood or new wood. Well, these flower spikes are visible on the plant by maybe even late summer, certainly by mid-fall. And so if you were to cut the plant back hard in the wintertime, you'd be cutting off all these flower stalks and there wouldn't be any bloom that spring. Okay.
That's it for the question.
That's it for the question.
Little sign out.
Sure. Really appreciate your time today. I'm Douglas Ruhren from the J.C. Ralston Arboretum at NC State in Raleigh, North Carolina, and I hope we'll see you a month from now on the April Plantsman's Tour, or Plant Lovers Tour. Thank you. Be well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you and happy birthday.
Doug, thank you, Dennis.
Thank you. Thank you.
Or happy birthdays, Doug.